living and non-living things. Alright, so we have some diagrams here illustrating living things and non-living things. Let's see what we have in the textbook. Okay, it says the world is composed of living things and non-living things. Look at figure 1.1 above. It is easy to separate living things from the non-living things. The pangolin, fish, frog, maize plant and man are the living things or organisms, while moon, sun, soil, pin and bucket with water are the non-living things. Now looking at the diagrams, we have pangolin. Pangolin is an animal, a living thing. We have the moon. The moon is not a living thing. We have the fish is a living thing. The sun, not a living thing. We have the frog is the living thing. We have the maize plant, living thing. We have the pin, non-living thing. We have man, living thing, and lastly we have bucket containing water as non-living thing. Alright, so they say it is a fact of biology that substances making up living things are derived directly or indirectly from water, air and soil, which are non-living things. Both living and non-living things are made up of chemical elements. It is also a fact that when living things die, their substances return to the realm of the non-living things. Therefore, there is a close relationship between living and non-living things. However, living things have basic characteristics which distinguish them from the non-living things. Alright, so for real, living things utilize non-living things to generate energy, generate food and every other thing, and even upon death, living things, their body decompose to release gases. They are just related such that living things utilize the sun energy. The sun is a non-living thing, of course, in the presence of gases such as carbon dioxide and water. Now it produces food, and as well respiration occurs, such as in case of man, we breathe in oxygen, breathe out carbon dioxide. You can see the interrelationship between living things and non-living things. Alright, so now let us discuss on the characteristics of living things so that we can be able to identify living things from non-living things. Number one, we have movement. It says generally living things are capable of carrying out one form of movement or the other. Most animals move from place to place on their own accord, either in search of food, mate, shelter or escaping from enemies. Most plants are fixed and can only move certain parts of their body, such as shoots and roots in growth movement, opening and closing of some flowers and leaves. However, some non-living things move. The air moves in form of wind. The wind carries dust particles in the atmosphere. Water moves in form of current. These movements are mainly caused by external factors. For example, wind is caused by one region having a low pressure and the other having a high pressure. Wind therefore moves from high pressure region to low pressure region. No structures are involved in this movement, but in living things, structures such as muscles, bone, flagella, cilia are involved in their movement. Alright, so this place, starting from the beginning, movement is talking about change in location, change in position. Are you with me? Yes. So we have most animals, they move from place to place. Alright, they are being able to move from one place to another place in search of food, search of water, for looking for their mates, pairing and some other associations. While plants are fixed, they can just move to the left, to the right in response to stimuli, which we are still going to talk about as the characteristics of living things. Alright, so if you would remember Newton's law of motion, which stated that a body at rest will continue to be at rest and a body in motion will continue to be in motion unless acted upon by an external force. That only applies to the non-living things. The living things actually have structures that enables them to move. For example, as mentioned earlier, we have the flagella, we have the cilia, muscles, bone. Are you with me? But non-living things are being propelled by external factors. For the example we gave of wind, wind carries dust particles. The propelling factor there is the wind. It is what? It is that dust particles are being moved from one place to another through the wind. Right, so that's that about movement. Not that non-living things can't move. No, non-living things can move, but they are being propelled to move by external factors. Meanwhile, living things have structures that enable them move on their own. Number two, that's the second characteristics of living things. We have respiration. All living things respire. All living things need energy for work. The chemical energy for work is released by the oxidation of respiratory substrates in living cells. Now, all living things respire in the presence or absence of oxygen. In the presence of oxygen, we call it aerobic respiration. In the absence of oxygen, we call it anaerobic respiration. Now, this is being carried out to supply the body with enough and necessary energy needed for the work of the body. Now, we have number three, nutrition. All living things feed to provide chemical energy for work and materials for growth and repair of worn out parts. Now, all living things take in food. This food is being broken down and the nutrients are being absorbed. And these nutrients have specific functions which they carry out in the body. For example, we have the carbohydrates, we have the lipids, fat and oil, we have the protein, we have the vitamins, the minerals, and all of that. So they have their specific role and they are derived from the food we eat. That is what nutrition. Number four, we have irritability, that is sensitivity. Irritability is just the response to stimuli. We say irritability is the response to stimuli. That's external stimuli, right? So if you unknowingly touch a hot object, probably in the kitchen or where you work, you quickly withdraw your hand. The hot object is the stimulus. For plural, we have stimuli. The withdrawal of your hand is the response. Now, this action is actually being controlled by the nervous system. The withdrawal of your hand is the response. Yes, exactly. The sensory receptors on your body, your skin, your hand, they feel the hotness, all right? And then we have the effector, which is connected to the muscles, which gives us a quick withdrawal. Are you with me? So your hand just nods. It is a reflex action. All right. So we have irritability is the ability of living things to respond to changes in external and internal stimuli such as light, water, sound, temperature, hunger, chemical and physical substances. The shoots of green plants bend towards the source of light, while the roots bend towards the source of water. An animal will move from a region of excessive heat to a cool region. Alright, so the shoot of green plant bending towards the source of light is because of the sun energy. They want to carry out photosynthesis. For that, they need energy from the sun. So they always tend to bend towards the sun rays, the sunlight, so that they can derive enough energy to be able to produce enough food. While the roots bend towards the source of water, so that the xylem tissues or whatever tissues taking water upward can actually have enough water to take upward. You can see this is even more like, should I say, adaptation, right? We have number five, growth and development. It says growth is an irreversible enlargement of an organism. Growth occurs when outside substances are built into structure of the body. That is, they become part of the body. Now, when the food you eat becomes a part of your body, growth occurs. Now, I know that sounds a bit confusing when it says when outside substances are built into structure of the body. That is just to say that this food you are eating, it is an outside substance. It was not part of your body. But then you take it in, assimilation occurs. Catabolism and anabolism. When anabolism exceeds catabolism, growth occurs. So now when you eat this food, it builds up materials. There's an increase in your body mass and you experience growth. So it says, in other words, when anabolism, that is the building up of materials, exceed catabolism, which is the breaking down of built materials, growth occurs. Now, development is the change in shape and form of an organism as it ages. However, some non-living things grow. For example, crystals grow, but the growth of crystals is not a true growth. The growth of crystals is by external addition. Development is a change in form, shape, and size as an organism grows to maturity. A crystal in a solution of similar materials grows by mere addition of the solid particles to its surface. This growth is reversible. A man does not grow by adding food to the surface of the body, but by only assimilation of food substances into the body. Now, development is the change in shape and form of an organism as it ages. When you were 2 years old, your body shape is different from when you are 20 years old. Are you with me? So as you grow, your body shape changes. Even a young youth who is a bodybuilder, he may have a very good structure at his youthful age because he's actively involved building his body, going to the gym and all that. But as he grows old, he will not be able to keep up with some of these activities. And then there is an observable change in his body structure. So that's just it. As you grow, there's a change in your body shape and your body form. Now, growth also occurs in non-living things, but in non-living things, it is by the addition of materials to their body, to their surface, to their, for example, let's say what could grow, what non-living thing could grow. Even let's say pumping a balloon, you are just blowing air. It looks as if the balloon is getting bigger in size. Now, one thing you should note about growth is that growth is irreversible. But now, this non-living thing, for example, this balloon, when you pump air in, you can actually pump the air out, and then it returns to its initial size. You can see that the growth there was reversed. But in living things, in human beings, in animals, in plants, once it has grown, it cannot be reversed. Alright, and it is only by the assimilation of food substances into the body. That's when you eat, that's when nutrition comes in. You can see how connected they are. Number 6, we have excretion. Living things must get rid of waste, poisonous substances from the body. If waste products are allowed to accumulate in the body, they will cause the death of the organism. The removal of the metabolic waste products is called excretion. Now, upon assimilation, there are some food particles, there are some particles that actually are, should I say, neutral, or they are not needed by the body, or they already are in excess, so the remaining ones are to be eliminated. So that is where excretion comes in, whereby they are being removed from the body. We could have them as in urine, feces, as in sweat, and every other thing, excretion. Alright, now number 7, we have reproduction. All living things reproduce their own kind. Since the lifetime of living things is limited, reproduction must be carried out for the continuation of life. Therefore, living things must reproduce themselves either asexually or sexually. Now, reproduction is just about the continuity of life. All living things, they reproduce their own kind. You won't see a goat giving birth to a lion. And without reproduction, without the continuity of life, these living things are going to become extinct. So we can actually see the importance of reproduction. And non-living things don't reproduce. They are being created. They are being modified, but they cannot reproduce. Reproduction is a feature, is a characteristic of only living things. We are still going to talk about the virus, because the virus seems to be a complicated thing on its own. It is actually a midline between living and non-living things because of its ability to reproduce in living cells, and it crystallizes, becomes inactive when not in a living cell. We are still going to talk about that. So therefore, living organisms must reproduce themselves either sexually or asexually. Asexually applies to plants, where we have the vegetative propagation. Alright, so animals don't reproduce asexually, they reproduce sexually. Asexually could also involve binary fission and all that. Right, now we have limited size. All living things have a limited size. Each species has its own limited size. For example, a dog can never grow to the size of an elephant, and no matter how well you feed a pigeon, it can never grow to the size of a turkey. That's very true, it's self-explanatory. Number 9, we have lifespan. All living things have a definite period of existence. No organism lives forever. When conditions become unfavorable for existence, life ceases. All living things pass through the following stages. A, we have origin or birth. B, we have growth. C, we have maturity. D, we have productivity. E, we have aging. And lastly, we have death. So it actually starts with birth and ends with death. And we have growth. Growth is in the whole process. Growth can be found in the whole process. Right? So we also have maturity, productivity, aging. That's very true. Competition, number 10. Competition is the struggle for survival of the fittest among living things. All living things struggle for the existence of life. They struggle for light, they struggle for space, they struggle for water, they struggle for food. And these are some form of competition for existence. This can also be used to select the most hybrid and the strongest, survival of the fittest. Only the strongest will survive. It's actually a good method of selection, and you cannot see that among non-living things. For example, in a place where you have rats and you have just a limited food, some rats will actually die, some will grow bigger, some may even eat their fellow rat. But in non-living things, you won't see competition between non-living things. For example, let's take air for example. Air consists of different gases. Now these gases, they have their own proportion, they have their own space. You won't see argon trying to overpower carbon dioxide. No, there's no need for all that. They are non-living. Alright, number 11, we have adaptation. All living things must have the ability to adapt to their environment if they are to survive the exigencies of the unstable earth. Yes, tolerance. You may have to change your location, you may have to be exposed to some unfavorable conditions. No climate is permanent. You have climate change. Alright, so when there is a climate change, you are used to one already and then you are now seeing another. You have to adapt. You have to adapt for that period. We have number 12, maintenance of constant internal environment, homeostasis. It says all living things have the ability to keep their internal environment, that is pH, temperature, salt content, in a constant form or within tolerable conditions despite changes in the external environment. Now, not even some, all living things, as said, have the ability to keep their internal environment in a constant form. We have the cold-blooded animals, we have the warm-blooded animals. So we have vasoconstriction, vasodilation. So when they are being faced with different, different external temperature, external pH, like they have to, adapt. They have to change their own body system if it's to dilate the blood cells, the blood vessels near the skin, if it's to constrict it in response to the temperature from the environment. Right, so that's that about homeostasis. We'll still talk about that later on. Now, non-living things have no life in them. They do not have the characteristics of living things. Some non-living things exist as gases, as liquid, and as stone. We can see the examples. Now, they give us some similarity between living and non-living things. Number 1, is say they both have size, they both possess shape, they both have weight. Yes, they both have it. Right? They are matter. Matter is anything that has mass and occupies space. Alright, so now moving to differences between living things and non-living things. Number 1, we have living things have life in them, non-living things don't have life in them. Number 2, we have living things feed, respire, excrete, reproduce, and respond to stimuli. Non-living things, they do not feed, respire, excrete, reproduce, and respond to stimuli. Living things number 3 says movement by living things is carried out by structures such as muscles, bones, the locomotor system, flagella, cilia, while movement by non-living things is caused by external factors such as wind and current. Wind carries dust particles from one place to another, current moves water. Number 4, we have growth is by assimilation of food substance into the body. That is, growth is internal and it is not reversible. Meanwhile, in non-living things, growth is by external addition of substances to the body. For example, the growth of crystals as mentioned earlier, and it is reversible. Living things age and die. Non-living things do not age and they never die. Living things can never exist without non-living things. For example, most living things need oxygen for respiration to exist. All living things need water to exist. Meanwhile, non-living things can exist without living things. Okay, that's very, very true. Living things, they need, they are taking in gases, they are taking in carbon dioxide or taking in oxygen. So in the absence of all these, that's death. And water is also essential for life. Water, as mentioned earlier, could even lead to competition, survival of the fittest amongst living things. You can see how bad non-living things has gained influence in the lives of living things. Meanwhile, non-living things are not affected by living things. No living thing is made up of one element. Some living things, such as oxygen, these are made up of one element. Alright, no living thing is made up of one element. It is a group of elements. For example, like even the simplest cell, like they have one or two elements. For example, amoeba, it has the pseudopodia, it has the cell membrane and all that. It's not made up of just one element. Meanwhile, some non-living things such as oxygen, hydrogen are made up of just one element. That is they are monoatomic. So some of them are monoatomic, they can exist, some can exist as molecules. Alright. It says the interrelationship between living things and non-living things. Okay, as mentioned earlier in the second paragraph of this chapter, we talked about how living things and non-living things depend on each other. Alright, so now we are going to dive deeper into that aspect. It says living and non-living things interrelate. Non-living things provide nutrients for living things. Green plants manufacture their food from carbon dioxide using sunlight energy, which are non-living things. Animals depend upon plants for food. During respiration, almost all living things use oxygen and give out carbon dioxide. All the components of living things are derived from non-living things. When living things die, all their components by process of decay revert to the realm of the non-living things. Now, interrelationship still on it. It's a green plants during photosynthesis manufacture their food with the aid of sunlight, chlorophyll, carbon dioxide, and water. Animals cannot manufacture their food, right? So they feed on plants. Animals are called heterotrophs, while plants are called autotrophs. Thus, plants are the producers, animals are the consumers. Another instance, we have the respiratory process. Says during the respiratory process, animals give out carbon dioxide as a waste product. Plants make use of this carbon dioxide to manufacture their food. And during photosynthesis, these plants also give out oxygen as a byproduct, which animals use for respiration. Lastly, when organisms die, microorganisms cause the decay, such as bacteria, fungi. The decayed organisms form manure, which plants absorb as soil nutrients, and there are also release of gases. Alright, dead things. Dead things once lived and had all the characteristics of living things, but once they become dead, that's lifeless, they are referred to as dead things and no longer possess the characteristics of living things. For example, you will see a dead thing reproducing, you will see a dead thing moving, you will see a dead thing responding to stimuli, you won't see a dead thing respiring, you won't see it carrying out respiratory processes, right? So they once lived but then are no longer living. Wood and wooden materials such as box, chair, bed, table, books are derived from plants that once lived. Animal leather and skeleton are derived from animals that once lived. So you can see how living things are still being utilized even after their death. They are still being utilized as non-living things. So characteristics of dead things, we have the body of a dead thing is made up of dead cells. Dead things decay if not properly preserved, and dead things lack characteristics of living things. So the cells actually, they make up the body system. The cells is the building block of life. So for it to be dead, it means the cells are already dead. That's the foundation is dead already. Secondly, they decay if not properly preserved. You can actually preserve dead things. But if not properly preserved, they surely decay due to the presence of bacteria, fungi. Number 3 says dead things lack characteristics of living things. For sure, they once lived but they are no longer living. Now let us talk about the differences between plants and animals under table 1. That's based on the characteristics and some other factors. Then in the next video we'll continue with classification, which is taxonomy of living things. Okay, for number 1 we have plants possess green coloring pigments called chlorophyll. Therefore, they can manufacture their own food by photosynthesis, exceptions being fungi and certain bacteria. Alright, so bacteria actually now has its own kingdom Monera. So we are just looking at it, and fungi is a non-green plant, so it does not have chlorophyll to carry out photosynthesis. Animals have no chlorophyll, therefore cannot manufacture their food by photosynthesis. They have to depend upon the food of green plants. Animals are heterotrophs, they are consumers. Plants are autotroph producers. Number 2, we have locomotion. Generally, plants do not move to search for their food, hence there are no organs of locomotion. While animals move to search for their food, hence they have organs of locomotion. Sense organs are absent in plants but present in animals. Organ of respiration, okay, in plants there are no real organs to carry out respiration, hence the absence of respiratory movement. While animals have organs of respiration, hence respiratory movement are carried out. Lungs, as in mammals, are examples. Note: respiratory organs are not present in lower animals such as amoeba. Lower animals such as amoeba, they make use of diffusion for their exchange of gases. Number 5, we have energy. They are energy transforming organisms, that they are anabolic, they build up energy. While the animals are energy spending organisms, that's catabolic, breaking down. Excretory organs, there are no special excretory organs in plants, but in animals we have special excretory organs. We have the kidneys, invertebrates to eliminate waste product. We also have the skin. We also have some other organs involved. Growth is indefinite in plants, but growth is limited in animals. For example, you can see a mango tree just keeps growing and growing for ages. We have some trees that are very old in history. Alright, for the cell wall, it says cell wall has a dead, rigid cellulose cell wall, hence a definite shape. Alright, that's for the plant. The plant, they have a cell wall, right? While animals have a cell membrane. It says here, cell wall has a living flexible membrane, hence it can change its shape. Vacuole. A plant cell has a large central vacuole, while animal cell usually has no vacuole, but if present is very small. The cytoplasm is thin in plants, the cytoplasm is large in animals. Plants store food as starch, while animals store food as glycogen. And lastly, centrole is absent in plants but present for cell division in animals. So that's all for today. That's all for this video. Thank you so much for joining us. In the next video, we shall be talking about classification, taxonomy of living things. We shall be talking about the binomial nomenclature, and we shall also be talking about the hierarchy of living organisms. Thank you so much for joining today's class. Sincerely appreciate. See you in the next class.